the minutes?
Yes.
Are there any changes, additions, deletions, etc.?
Mr. Chairman, Troy, I have a couple small ones.
Okay.
On page 2, second paragraph from the bottom, I guess second sentence, it said he shared his, it should be screen and not screed, I guess. On page 3, last paragraph, this is regarding the golfing situation. He said he asked for the cost for the unlimited passes. That's me, and all I was asking was the amount of unlimited passes being offered this year, to which he answered.
Okay. So
and on page 4, starting with the paragraph Mr. Dakowitz reviewed, it should be tax collector, not tax collector report. And that's all I had.
all right. Is there anything else? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
All right, Artie abstains. The motion carries and the minutes are approved as amended. Second item on the agenda, there is no special appropriation section A, but there is a section B, and that is the tax collector's office. Lisa, are you with us? Would you mind? Well, actually, let's move the item. Would someone move the item? All right.
I'll move it.
Okay, Artie moved it. Ms. Biagirelli?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. We are seeking to remedy a deficiency in our overtime line item in our operating budget for this fiscal year. We are already overdrawn approximately $8,500 in our overtime account. That account used to be funded at about $17,000, $18,000 a year. And a couple years ago, we scaled it back and we were budgeted for $13,000, but I've had a number of, I had a vacancy in my office for nearly 2 years, our cashier clerk, that was just filled last month. And we also had, unfortunately, at the same time, a couple of people out on long-term medical leave due to COVID and other surgeries and things of that nature. And the nature of our work is such that we really can't fall behind. We have cash receivables and things like that. So we exercise judicious use of overtime, but when you're short a cashier and it's collection time and you have funds to process, it becomes difficult. So we didn't want to fall too behind in our work. And you'll know from the past that I don't usually come before you seeking these types of transfers. But just by way of example, last year at the end of the fiscal year, we did return close to $50,000 in our salary account because of that vacancy. So it's still, I hope that you will consider approving the transfer because we felt it was important to keep current with our work.
So this is coming from your salary and wage account and would be going into the overtime account. So it's basically,
Yes.
6 of one, half dozen of the other in some ways, right? I mean,
Yes.
in some respects, right? Are there any other questions? Okay, all in favor of approving the item, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion carries and the item has been approved. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
we appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
So thank you for that.
Stay well.
Thank you, you too. Other business, section C, the presentation of the recommended operating budget. I spoke with Joe Androsco, who asked to present the Oak Hills report ahead of the sort of main presentation of this meeting. So if that's okay with everyone else, Joe, would you like to give us a brief accounting of what's going on?
Sure, happy to. So the financials reported in this pack reflect December month end. And, this wintertime is not really a lot going on in terms of revenue generating financial impact for the park. And so I can tell you that I don't know exactly what the January month end numbers are, but they're not very different from the December month end. So this acts as a pretty good proxy. Operating income is over budget. We ended with just over $500,000 in cash. And expenses are lower than budget, partially due to a reclassification, which we've talked about in the past. But it's actually a little bit lower than budget, even on top of that. So both metrics are in the right direction. We've kind of completed on the plan to make the repayments to the city as per schedule. So that's all going fairly well. I think at the last meeting, we gave updates on the restaurant expected. Well, I mean, things were ready in December COVID Omicron variant made us think twice about opening. We wanted to be a successful, splashy opening, so we didn't want to put any hindrances on it. And so thought better of that and moved to an expected opening date of March. It's ready, turnkey, ready to open. We want to make it an appropriate time to be opening a restaurant. So that's still the plan. Nothing has emerged to put that at risk. So I think that's pretty much the overall update. But happy to answer any questions.
Joe, this is Troy real quick. How many unlimited passes have you sold so far?
I haven't seen really recently. I think end of 2 weeks ago, so end of January, it was at 44. So they're filling up, and we'll stop it at the 50 cap that we put in.
Okay, good luck.
Thanks.
Joe, I had one quick question. Was just a follow up from the last time when we had Mr. De Palma with us. The question came up on comp rounds, and there was a lot of confusion as to how what the cost of the comp rounds were.
On the Golf Now system, right, Jim?
Yeah.
Exactly. Can you shed any light on that?
What exactly is the question?
That we have to wait and talk to Paul?
I don't think so, but can you, sorry, I didn't go back and watch the video, so I don't know exactly the question that emerged. Can you just clarify for me? Or okay, we can follow up offline if we'd prefer that, but if it's very detailed, but.
No, it's not too detailed. It's just a question is that there are non-revenue rounds. And when we were digging into this, we found out that the majority of those non-revenue rounds were a factor of the booking company that you use. And that the way it was explained to us that rounds were given to them. And I asked the question, well, does that revenue then come to us? Is it discounted and is it to them and we get some revenue out of that? And there's no revenue coming from it.
No.
So if I understand this, if we give them 100 rounds, that we don't have any revenue from that 100 rounds?
Correct.
Why?
So
why would you give away 100 rounds?
Yeah, why are we doing this?
So once again, if we classify that as an operating expense, it would be the operating expense.
Well, first of all, it's not an operating expense, it's a marketing expense. Is it not?
If we classify it as an operating expense or a marketing expense, we would pay that money to Golf Now. That is not the way Golf Now structures its contracts. And it's not common within the industry for that to be the case. The common way is for each point of sale system, you give the servicer a certain number of rounds per
Why would
day.
we even bother to do that if we're not going to get any revenue from it?
It's the cost of having the point of sale operator system.
Why would you need a point of sale operating system if you're not going to get any revenue from it?
you're getting revenue from all the other rounds that you book online and in person by having that point of sale operating system up and running. Otherwise, it would be pencil and paper.
I'm, somebody else help me out on this, because I just don't understand. If
Is your concern, James, that that if it was done, if it was charged, let's say the rounds were charged and the expense was actually paid, versus sort of this comp situation, that the city theoretically would receive income from the rounds that were paid, and although that would be offset on the Oak Hill side by an expense. In other words, they would have an expense of $100,000 more. We would get the revenue from that $100,000 in rounds paid. Is that the issue?
See if I can simplify it. Is that how much do we pay for this? If I were to dollarize, if this book by online booking system charges us something, how much would they charge us? Is that for every reservation that's made online goes through them?
Yeah. So the structure that they have is we have 3 point of sale systems, and we give them 1 round per day per point of sale system. So it's 3 rounds per day. They don't sell all of them. They don't use all of them. If we kind of just did that average of 30 days, I actually don't know if I can give you a good solid number, but what we can do is historically go back. It'll be a little bit of work, but we can go back and say, okay, how many of those rounds were actually sold? And we know what our average round is. So if you think of it like an opportunity cost, right? If we're getting $32.50 or $33.50 per round on average, we can just say, okay, in July of 21, there were 293 of those rounds times $33.50, and that's the implied, right? The imputed cost of that expense in a way, right? But there is no if, right? This is the way that they structure their accounts. There's no asking them to do it differently. I guess we could, but I know what the answer is going to be.
If we did not use that organization, we would not be booking any reservations online?
Well, we'd have to find another way to do that, right? We'd have to build it ourselves or find another servicer. But this is kind of par for the, I say it all the time when I'm on here, par for the course amongst these sorts of servicers.
So if I call up to make a reservation, to book a tea time, I am going through one of those?
You're probably getting the clubhouse, but they're entering it into the system.
So they enter it into the system that this organization, what's the name of the organization?
Golf Now.
Golf Now.
That's either the product of the organization. I can't remember. There's 2. I can't remember.
Well, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So if I call up, they're putting it into the Golf Now system. So it's a system that you've got.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so instead of paying them dollars, we give them free rounds of golf.
Right. Well, yeah, to sell on their own through the
so
system.
It's a barter system.
Yes.
So I thought we went through this before, that we don't want to have barter systems because we're underestimating our revenue, and we're not recognizing the expense either.
I think what Joe's saying is that is the way they do it, and that apparently seems to be the way the industry does it. And what you're saying, Jim, is
I wouldn't be sure that the industry does it that way.
Well, that's what Joe said. I mean, I have no way of knowing if it's what Joe said.
Well, that's what our pro tells me. We could go benchmark. We could, do a study, I suppose, to find out how the rest of the courses are handling this. I suppose.
Okay.
That doesn't seem like a effective use of funds to me.
Okay, that doesn't. I registered my concern about bartering before, so I'd like to see what it is in the budget and how much this is costing us, okay? Because this is an expense that we're incurring, but you're burying that expense through this understatement of revenue. So
Well, it's not so-
on those
it's-
share, on those, do we include those rounds that they get as part of the $2 that we're paying the city?
They are not, no. We've spoken internally about including them.
So
And
they should be included. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
so we, as a management team, classify them as non-revenue rounds because there's no revenue generated by them. And we've spoken internally about classifying them otherwise, the way that would trigger a repayment to the city. And that is going through some discussion internally still.
I don't know what kind of a discussion you should have on that, because those rounds, $2.50 a round goes to the city. There's nothing complicated about that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take it out of you. I'm trying not to give you a hard time, but I'm just having a hard time understanding why. I mean, this is a very simple, straightforward issue. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop talking now. We can follow up on this next time.
Yeah, I mean, what seems a little nuanced about this is that, according to Joe, this is the way these operating systems or these point of sale systems in the golf industry operate. But if that's the case, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. If it isn't the case, then we can shop around and actually find a provider that will actually that we would have to actually pay, and then presumably we would get those rounds that this current provider sells on their own. We would get revenue from those rounds because we'd be able to sell them on our own. So that's the only, I think the only issue, or what makes it nuanced, is that this is either it either is or it isn't the industry standard and what we can expect from any provider. I guess that's the question.
Could I make a suggestion? I've inherited a whole bunch of computer systems or processes in my 3 years with the city. And what we've often done is we do an RFP and we go out into the marketplace and we see what the alternatives are. It may be that it is the industry standard, but there are 1 or 2 startups who are willing to work on our basis without barter, and just we buy the software or we lease the software, and that's our only cost. And if we've had it in use for a number of years, we just see what else is out there. If this is the best thing and the best value, then we continue. But if there are alternatives, we can explore it. We have processes to do this. We don't have to do a survey of competitors. You look at the marketplace. Just a suggestion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Troy. Just to follow up on this, Jim, I agree with what Jim's saying 100%. And this has been going on month after month. Joe, I appreciate your comments, but last month you weren't here. Your colleague was here, the chairman of Oak Hills. He told us he was going to check with the pro and get back to us. Now you're saying you didn't know that, or you didn't get a chance to look at what we said with the comments. But this is just going on month after month. It's a simple question. I didn't realize that when I'm logging in, I'm using the Golf Now system. I thought Golf Now was just to fill open spots at a discount. I thought that was what their role was. I have no idea, but it's the first time I'm hearing that they were using a Golf Now system for all of our tracking. Now, this is very confusing. You guys have to sit down and come back and tell us, you and the chairman, what is going on, because we shouldn't be talking about this every month.
All right. Any other questions? All right. So how do we leave this? That Joe's going to look into this and get back to us on that? Is that the?
So yeah, I think we just got to find out, how does it work? I don't know how it works.
Okay. Is that okay, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
All right. All right. We can now proceed to the presentation of the fiscal year 22-23 recommended operating budget.
I guess that's me.
Yep. That's it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity.
Hold on, Mr. Dekowitz, just 1 second. I wanted
Oh,
to.
yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yes,
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor.
I wanted to make an opening comment relative to the operating budget that we've been working on for, well, quite some time now. First of all, I want to thank and give recognition to Henry and Tom. Henry's been working very diligently, very hard. Tom just came on board. He's hit the ground running. The two of them working together are quite a team. So I want to thank both of them. I also want to thank the department heads and all the departments in the city, because historically we've shown that they are very responsible when it comes to living within their budget. Whenever we have to give a special appropriation for any reason, it's usually a very good reason and something most of the time beyond their control. And they come in and they explain it. They've got all the documentation they need, and they come up with a very valid reason for us having to make a special appropriation or a transfer. Now, having said that, we've put together a budget that right now is a work in progress. It's the first iteration that you're seeing, and we have a lot more work to do. The budget you see right now will look a little different when we're coming out on the other side with a final budget recommendation for approval for this board and for a cap recommendation from the Common Council. And as this board knows, we will be bringing each of the departments before you to go over their budget, to explain what they need. And it's our job to look at this budget and find out where, hey, we might be able to make some more cuts someplace. We've got a few things that we can shift around. And so, as I said, it's a work in progress. You know, the past 2 years, we've had a very difficult situation. And I think we all have said that over and over again, so I don't have to repeat that. But we have people who have lost jobs, who have found their source of income interrupted and having financial struggles. We now have a supply chain shortage, and prices are going up, and everything, whether it's heating oil, whether it's electricity, whether it's food, gasoline for their car. Prices are rising and their spending power has become less. Then on the other side, we know we fund the Board of Education and we make an investment in our children, which is critically important. And we have children who have struggled socially, emotionally. The learning curve has been interrupted as well. We have a situation where the remote learning might not have been as effective, and you know it probably hasn't been. So we have to do something, whatever we can, to make sure that our children are able to continue their education at the level that we expect, and that they're going to be able to move on, and we will provide them that world-class education. Having said that, we also have, as Henry mentioned the other night, a huge debt service looking us in the face. Fortunately, we are trying to be as frugal and to move things around so that we don't get hit at any one time harder than we anticipate. We want to do everything we can, and believe me, we're going to do everything we can to protect our AAA bond rating, which is critically important to me and critically important to you and critically important to the city. So we're going to move that forward. Again, fortunately, we've been very responsible and we have a very healthy fund balance, but we also have to be careful about using the fund balance, because that doesn't last forever. They call it a rainy day fund, and it is a rainy day fund. And I think you all know that for the past 2 years, it's been pouring, but we've still been able to keep a healthy fund balance. And again, a lot of that has to do with our team, our department heads that live responsibly within their budget, recognize their obligation to do so, and have been very good at, when we reconcile budgets, turning money back in, not spending down just when they get towards the end of the budget so they can do it. So having said all that, I just want to say that the budget we put before you, we believe, is a fair budget right now, but there's still room. We're still looking at areas where we can make savings, where we can cut expenses, because we recognize the fact that we can't keep taxing our residents to a point where they can't afford to stay in their own homes. Unfortunately, the state of Connecticut is one of very few states that relies so heavily on property taxes. And the mindset is, well, they can raise money, they just have to tax people. That's not where I come from. Where I come from is we have to do everything we can to help our people, to help our residents, and not make them feel that they can't afford to live in their homes. Some people living in their homes and paying taxes, that their home has been paid off and their children are no longer in our schools. So again, we look forward to a good, healthy, robust budget discussion. And I want to thank again, Henry, Tom, my team, and others who worked very hard to get this together. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to share my screen for the slideshow. I believe you might have some of these already in your packages. Can everyone see the screen, the slides?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we're looking at the recommended operating budget. This is the mayor and CFO recommended operating budget for fiscal year ending June 30, 23. Let me see if I can move to the next page. That would be interesting. As we do. No? Hang on. Tom, you want to take over, share your screen, and then we'll just do it that way?
I don't have a share option, Henry.
You don't have a share option.
No. I'm clicking on the three dots in my upper right, and I don't see it.
Okay. Let me see what I could do here. I don't know why it's.
Maybe this one down here, Henry?
I'm sorry. I'm just, for some reason, it's being difficult. And I don't understand. Here we go. Okay. So let me just give you a table of contents, what we're going to cover this evening. The budget process, economics, the recommended operating budget. We're going to talk about the Board of Education and the efficiency study. We go into the detailed recommended operating budget by city department. I then want to talk about our rainy day fund, known as the unrestricted unassigned fund balance. Show you how we go from the budgets for the city and the Board of Ed and get to a mill rate and a tax levy, and then wrap it up with some concluding remarks. Here's our calendar. The budget director sends the pro forma budget to each department in the middle of October. Tom and I meet with all the departments to review what they requested, mostly in December, a little spillover into January. Tonight, we have our recommended operating budget. The Finance Committee holds a public hearing on the 17th, a week and a half from now. Common Council sets the budget cap on the 22nd, only 2 weeks away. Your good selves have meetings with the departments from March 2 to March 21, and then you hold a public hearing on the 23rd. And after you discuss this, you forward a tentative budget to the council. Council sets a final cap on April 12th. That's the schedule, but according to the rules, no later than April 19th. And then you set the final budget and tax levy on May 2nd. I've talked about this every year. I just want to reinforce it. The laws of economics, as I see, they apply to budgeting. One is it's about making choices and trade-offs. No one has all the resources in the world to do what they want to do. So it's about setting priorities, making decisions, knowing there are not enough resources to get everything we all want. The law of diminishing returns is also relevant. And this basically says, if you make a $1,000 investment in something new, you might get a $1,000 return. If you make a second $1,000 investment, you may only get a $900 return, then a $700 return, then a $500 return. So the law of diminishing returns says, as we keep investing the same amount, we get less and less of a return on investment. I think the key to all of this is return on investment. When we invest money or spend money, what is the return we get? Whether it's the efficiency of our operations, whether it's the benefit to the children and their improvement in learning, but we should always be looking at what is the return for the proposed investment. Here's a very important slide to me. I've shown this now for several years. People focus on those top lines that last year, the current budget year we're in now, 21-22, the city side was 189 million. And when I dropped down to the middle of the page, the public school board of ed side was 208 million. However, the city provides services for the schools, and we don't charge them a bill, and we don't show that anywhere. And so really, when people think it's 189 versus 208, it's misleading. Okay, there are in-kind services performed by the city, and I'm going to use the fiscal year 23 column. So we're proposing a budget of 196 million, but out of that, 14 million is used for in-kind services, and 15.3 is paying debt service for the Board of Ed. When you reduce the 196 by 29.4, our actual expenditures out of local taxes is 166.8 million. On the Board of Ed side, that 216.3 has to be added to the 14.1 and the 15.3, the 29.4. They're getting that benefit. It's as if they're spending the money. So they're not just spending 216.3, our recommended amount, they're spending 245 million. So it's 245 versus 166. The grand total for the city, $412.5 million, an increase of 3.7% from last year. But please note, if I can get some of those things, the diagrams away. Okay. The percentage split is really 40% for the city and 60% for the schools. And that's been consistent for the last 8 years. Okay, so don't let the 196 and the 216.3 mislead you. Right? Now, trying to get a handle on the public schools expenditures. Chitsame Lamb, our controller, went through our consolidated annual financial reports, which include the certified financial statements and a lot of other good data. And General Fund 11 is where the fundamental expenses are processed, just like our general fund expenses go through there. 188, 198, 204. You notice that in fiscal year 21, the Board of Ed spent 204. Their budget was 208. What they do is, by law, if they run a surplus of 2% of their budget and they request it, we have to give it to them. And they end up using it as a rollover for next year. So they work backwards. They say, we have 208, 4 million, we're allowed to roll over. They only spend 204 million. If they spent less than that, they would have to give that money back to us. That never happens. Okay? They have a grant fund, which has spent 21 million, 24 million, 32 million. It's great that they get all this grant money, but it's additional expenses. They're spending an additional $32 million that's just run through a different fund. School lunch fund, 5.9 million. Miscellaneous other special revenue funds, 1 million, and student activity funds, 685. So that subtotal is $244 million. And that's when we gave them 208, and they kept 4 for the succeeding year. However, the state pays their pension and OPEB costs, and it's consistently in the $29 to $30 million range. I include it because there's no freebie from the state. If the state is paying for our teachers' pensions, it's because they're getting state taxes from our residents. So it's another cost, even though it only shows up in Hartford, okay? And then I have those in-kind expenses that we talked about before. These are not disputed in any way. The Board of Education in the state asks us to complete these numbers, and we do it every year, and we get a lot of our numbers from the public school. So 11.5 million, and the debt service on their debt, the construction debt. So that's another 25 million. When you add it all up, they're at 299 million. Fiscal year 21, they spent 299 million, and they didn't even spend the 4 million that they rolled over. So I did a little calculation. How much did they spend in excess of the local budget? 19, it was 85 million, 45%. 88.2 million, 45%. 94.6 million, 46%. So actually, they have a lot of resources, and it's not even the 208, it's closer to $300 million. Last, okay, I am trying to turn the page.
I think it's the gray arrow there, the very, yeah, that's that right there. No, the other one.
I've been
No.
clicking it.
It's the other arrow, the one right to the right of it. No, the one to the right of that.
That's an arrow?
Yeah, that's right there. Yep.
Okay. Now, we've had a lot of special funding over the last 2 years for COVID and then the American Relief Act. And I wanted to just show everyone what that means for the city, because it's rather important. All right. So FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's part of Homeland Security, and they reimburse us for the costs of emergencies. We've had it with Hurricane Sandy, et cetera. And with COVID, they reimbursed us 100% of our eligible COVID expenditures. So on the city side, we had $1.7 million, and the schools did not get anything. CRF is the State of Connecticut Coronavirus Relief Fund. These were federal funds funneled to the state that then passed them on to the cities. Okay, there were 2 rounds. On the city side, we got a total of 1.9 million. The Board of Ed got 7.2 million. PSR, COVID Office of Early Childhood, the schools got another $452,000. The ESSER grant, that's an acronym that stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. The dollars were designed to help safely open and sustain the safe operation of schools. This is starting 2 years ago when COVID was a nightmare, and we wanted to make sure that the schools could open safely. So on round 1, they got $11 million. Round 2 was $2 million. Now, this third round, they call ESSER 3, is really part of the ARPA funds from the federal government. And they were allocated 24.8 million of ARPA funds, which they put into their ESSER column, and they have 37.9 million there. The Secretary of State, CTCL, is the Center for Technology and Civil Life. The Connecticut Secretary of State gave us $75,000, and Mark Zuckerberg gave us $52,000, and that went to the registrar to help us with election integrity, that $127,000. The ARPA column for the city falls into two categories. As the city, we were allocated $22.1 million. There's also money allocated by ARPA to counties. And as you all know, Connecticut does not have county governments anymore. So the federal government gave that money to the state to allocate to cities based on population, and we got another 17.2 million. So our total ARPA is 39.3. Just to summarize on the bottom, total ARPA monies, the schools got 24.8 million. We're getting 39.3, 64.1 million just out of ARPA, but in total, $88.5 million. Tremendous amount of money. It really helps us a great deal in recovering and reimbursing us for certain expenditures, and with the ARPA monies to invest wisely to improve the city. Let's talk a little bit about ARPA. The total funds available on ARPA is $39 million. About half the funds were received last spring, and we expect to receive the balance in April, May of this year. One half, almost $20 million, was designated to reduce general tax increases to taxpayers, both in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. We felt, as the mayor had indicated, COVID has taken a hit on our taxpayers. People have lost jobs, businesses have closed, and we felt offsetting some of the rate increases would benefit the taxpayers in a really meaningful way. So we used 13 million in our budget for this current year to totally offset the increase in taxes. And next year, we were planning on using about half as much. Now, if we don't need to use all of these monies, maybe we run surpluses. This was to close the gap based on our budget. But if our revenues are higher than what we planned, or if our expenses are lower, we might use those surplus monies to balance the budget, and then there would be more available for ARPA projects. It's something we'll have to see as we move forward. 12 to 15 million was targeted for flood mitigating projects in various parts of the city. I personally believe after offsetting tax increases, they have the highest return on investment. They improve quality of life, increase the value of properties throughout Norwalk. This is a great use of our one-time funds. Anthony Carr, head of Public Works, has some projects teed up ready to go for RFPs, others that are in the design phase, and with his engineers, figuring out which projects we can move forward on and use these monies very productively. The other designations of these monies include community services. Lamont Daniels is working with the nonprofits in Norwalk for all the good works that they do. He has a marvelous system explaining to everyone how the ARPA rules work, what the requirements are, that they have to be targeted into 5 categories that the U.S. Treasury Department has specified. He has application forms to make sure that the projects are ones we want to do that would be qualified for ARPA, and that the firms and nonprofits organizations that we work with are the best ones for those projects. Economic and community development. Maybe you saw the cover story on Norwalk Hour yesterday. Jessica Vanovich is working with all of our different departments, economic and community development, business, and tourism. And we're working in all these areas, small business programs to help fund small businesses. So there's a lot of positive for the community that's being run by Jessica. And she's working closely with Alicia King on that as well. High-speed fiber optic cabling, I've been looking into that. We have an RFQ that closed, a request for quotations, looking to see what firms we could partner with. With fiber optic cabling, there are two issues we're trying to overcome. The challenges historically. One is called access, and the other is called affordability. Cable companies are for-profit enterprises. They're going to invest their money where it's the smallest investment and the highest return. That's usually the densest part of a city or a geographic area. So when you're spread out rural in the Midwest, or in our case, when we're zoned maybe for larger properties, 1 or 2 acre properties, it's much more expensive for them to wire to get 100 customers. So they do that last. They're reluctant to do that, which counterintuitively, that sometimes leads to the most expensive, wealthy areas having not such great service, okay? The second problem is that they like to sell the most expensive bundles of services, $150 a month. That's where they make the most money. So consequently, there's a real issue of affordability. The federal government has worked on this and has subsidized off and on. There are some monies available for that. At the same time, we are looking at these potential partners that we might be able to work with them such that they offer a low-cost option. And one of them was even talking about wiring low-income housing so that there could be a study room where children living in low-cost housing would have a place to go to study and be networked and do their homework. So we're exploring all of that. We're at an initial stage, but we think that's a good long-term investment for the city. And again, we're looking at what is the return and what are the expenses and investment that we have to do. Any questions so far? Okay.
Nope, you're doing great.
So this was really gratifying. I started with last year's slideshow, which said everyone had agreed to do an efficiency study. I'm so very pleased to say the public schools and the city of Norwalk entered into a joint agreement with Evergreen Technologies to conduct an efficiency study. I think the agreement was done in the early fall. I think they started their work in October. The study scope covers the operations of both the schools and the city. It commenced in the fall. They reviewed an enormous number of documents. They interviewed numerous employees, including the mayor, the superintendent, chiefs of departments, department heads, staffers. They spent significant time on site for a more complete understanding. And I have to say, having been a management consultant earlier in my career, I've been very impressed with the professionalism, the thoroughness. They're asking the right questions. They don't duplicate each other. If you get interviewed by 3 people, the second or third person knows what was already asked and is asking further. I really am encouraged and I look forward to the results. Interim reports have been communicated on certain topics with certain senior executives. And what I was very pleased with, I thought because they started late in the fall, they might not be able to hit the original target date. But they have told me that they're looking at issuing a final report by the end of March. And that's critical because by that time, we will still have time. We will not have completed passing the operating and capital budgets. So we can utilize, especially the council, finance committee, your good selves, we can use the information we learn in the study to help us make better decisions regarding the budgets this year. So bottom line, We are recommending a total amount for the public schools of $216 million. Last year it was 208.4. It's an increase of $7.8 million or 3.75%. For the city side, we're looking at a recommended amount of $196.2 million. Last year was 189.2, an increase of $7 million or 3.69% over last year's approved. Obviously, the Board of Ed has a bigger base, 208 versus our 189. So even if we got the same increase, they would be getting more dollars. Okay. Let's look in a little bit more detail of what those changes are. So we have the mayor, the legislative, corporate council. Let's go to the bottom first. The city alone, city expenditures, we're up by $7 million, 3.69%. The Board of Ed is up by 7.8 million, 3.75. That's why we get a blended 372 for the whole city. Let me explain some of the numbers that are very large, if I might. That finance department is up by 15.8%. Let me explain that that's an aggregation. I mean, I have 7 departments reporting to me. And what happens is each of them needs some support that added up to 15.8%. So the tax assessor is doing the 5-year revaluation in October of 2023. It's beyond this coming year's budget, but he has to have expenses for this year in this year's budget in order to get that revaluation done. He has other professional services hiring these outside assessment firms to help us with the reval for $650,000. We're also moving off the assessment module in Munis. Out of 169 towns and cities in Connecticut, we are the last town in Connecticut that uses Munis for our assessment. We're going to a company called QDS, Quality Data Systems. They have the majority, I believe, at least half of the cities in Connecticut. And so we are looking to shift off of Munis to QDS, and there's an expense of $132,000 in there. He also asked for $40,000 to hire an auditor who will audit business personal property returns. And generally that kind of investment comes back in a multiple of revenue. In the purchasing area, Sharon Connors is my secret techie. And she's used this software called Bonfire to automate a lot of the processes, starting with a request for quotations, an RFP, when we do the purchase orders, all the way to paying the bills, very automated. Because of this new software, over the last 3 years, she has just about tripled the number of RFPs and RFQs she's done with the same total staff of 3 people, including herself. She's asked for an additional purchasing manager, which we agreed to. Also, she's in charge of central services. So for purchasing, $100,000 for the salary line and $45,000 because the telephone bills are going up. The controller's office, Chitsme Lamb and Deputy Karen Vitale, they've done yeoman work, but they feel that if they could get data entry staff to assist them. There's just still so much that's manually done. We keep trying to automate. So they've asked, and we've recommended $81,000 for them. On the tax collector side, Lisa is planning another tax sale in, say, August, September of 2023. So just like Bill Ford on the tax assessment side, she has certain expenses in fiscal year 2023 to do the tax sale, which will technically be in fiscal year 24. That's about $65,000. The IT department, a lot of pluses and minuses, $60,000. We keep trying to beef that up. We keep getting recommendations that we should do more and we need the resources to expand that. And in the budget department, we're looking at a budget analyst for 55,000. So it's a total of 1.15 million on an expense of 7.3, but it's really helping quite a number of departments with their most essential requests. The other one I'd like to talk about is employee benefits, which 35 million was approved last year. And we're looking at a recommended 38.4 million, 9.6% increase. No surprise, the biggest component is health insurance. Health insurance is going up 11.5%. Now, Tom and I had a very interesting phone call with our health insurance consultant, whose firm works, this is Siegel and Company, they work with the state of Connecticut on their health insurance. So they're as close to anyone on the Connecticut 2.0 plan. But as you've seen in recent years, she comes in with very high estimates, and then month by month, the numbers come down. Last year, the Board of Ed, when that number came down, they reduced their request by $1 million or $2 million. So we take what she thinks the number is going to be, we shave it a little. We don't want to come in too low, but there is a possibility that we may not need the total amount that she has indicated. So that's the 11.5%. In addition, we have things like the city liability, auto, and property insurance, and that's going up a certain amount, 40%, but it's on a very small number. It's going up $720,000. Workers' comp is changing. OPEB contributions, that's going up by $860,000. But those increases were on the less than the 9.6%. So it's mostly driven by health insurance. Those are the biggest numbers. When I look at the rest of the numbers, remember that our salary increases are 2.35%. When you add in step increases, you often get a 3%, a 2.5% total increase. So looking at these increases, they really aren't so horrible. I'll give you an example. Look at the police. They have a $27.1 million budget. They're coming in with only an increase of $450,000, 1.9%, and they're the largest budget. Public Works going from 24.9 to 26.4. So when I look at the numbers, the increases overall are very reasonable. And I think we've just gotten the message through the department heads and chiefs. When they submit their recommended numbers and we have our discussions with them, they play it straight. They know we're not going to stand for the fluff. But if they make a good case that they need the resources for better services, we try to accommodate them. And that's how we got to the recommended budget.
Henry, excuse me for 1 second. Can you, if you haven't mentioned it before, explain how we're funded along for OPEB and pension?
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Do it at the end. I want to have a shout out.
Okay.
I think our pension board has done phenomenally well, and I wanted to congratulate them. I know sometimes people take pot shots at them, but they've done a phenomenal job. When I sit in on the pension board meetings, I mean, I've got 40 years of finance experience. I sit back and listen and learn from these people. They have decades experience of investment management. Callan and Company is one of the 4 leading investment management advisors. They know how to extract the most value from them. The manager of this fund is leaving. How does that affect us? Maybe we should move. I've been very impressed with their discipline. When we had gains in our equity stock market investments, they started selling and adding more bonds. And I said, what are you doing? Interest rates are so low. I can't wait to issue new bonds. Why would you put money into bonds? They said, we have a certain target portfolio. We only have so much in each sector. When stocks, let's say, go up and we're now overweighted, we cut that back because that's the appropriate thing to do. You're supposed to you're supposed to measure investment management performance for a whole cycle, which would be peak to peak, trough to trough. And what impressed me is we lived through that in the last 2 years. In March of 2020, we had COVID hit, and the market took a hit of 50, 60%. They held steady. They rode it out. The market came back even stronger. And I'm pleased to report, and this is information from our comprehensive annual financial report for the year ended June 30, 2021. The rate of return on the pension plans for each of the 4 plans was 27.75%. Just remarkable. Okay. And the total of those 4 plans is 90% funded. I believe the last time I looked, the state of Connecticut is under 50%. Governments, this is a real challenge for many governments. State of California, Cook County, Illinois, the city of Chicago. They gave very generous benefits, and then they didn't fund it with the annual desired contribution. If you put in the amount of contribution that your actuaries tell you, depending upon the assumptions, in 15 to 20 years, you've come back from the underfunding and the funds are there, which is the right thing for the pensioners, and at the same time, financially, very prudent. So we are at 90.57% on the pensions. On the OPEB, which is the other post-employment benefits, which are mainly health insurance. I would say half governments in the state of Connecticut don't even have a separate pension plan, a separate fund for their OPEB liabilities. According to, this is page 65 of our consolidated annual financial report, our total OPEB liability is $136.3 million. The planned fiduciary net position of assets is $140.6 million. We have $4.3 million more assets than liabilities. We are 103% funded. Now that can change. You have a certain demographic makeup of your employees that can change, so your liability can increase. And of course, with the market, we anticipate getting a certain return. So on the OPEB, we have a target of 6.5%. And this year, we knocked the ball out of the ballpark with 24%. But let's say we only had a 2% return next year. The asset growth is not what we anticipate. So we might expand that gap. And instead of being 130%, maybe we're at 85%. But for right now, where we're sitting, I am so very proud and pleased that they're great performance. It takes away one of the biggest headaches, not just local governments, but counties and states have been dealing with. And again, congratulations to the pension board. Frank Nash is the chairman, and I think they've done a great job. Any other questions on the detailed budget? Okay, let's move on. Always a subject of interest is our rainy day fund. So the rainy day fund is technically unassigned and unallocated reserves on our balance sheet. Okay, we've had surpluses, we don't use them, they go onto the balance sheet as a reserve. Here are our total general fund expenditures year by year. Okay, budget this year is 397.6, recommended 412.4. That is total city and the public schools. Unrestricted unassigned fund balance at year end. 57.7, that's 16% of the general fund expenditures. That's the metric the rating agencies and others use to determine how good or weak your rainy day fund is. In 2019, we had 69.7 in the fund, 20.5%, but we planned on drawing down 6 million. We never did. The next year it was 58 million. And again, we planned on drawing down 6 million. We did not, 16%. In 21, the most recent year, we have a $72.4 million unassigned, unallocated fund balance. We had planned to draw down 8 million. I believe we only drew down 1 million. We used some of the surplus for rollovers. 4 million. Was that 2%? I told you the Board of Ed runs that surplus, and that 4 million will go to them. And we used 1 million on the city side. In a sense, we're rewarding managers for doing a good job, but at the same time, especially with the supply chain problems, they budgeted properly, they wanted to spend the money, but their suppliers weren't ready. And they said, we ran a surplus, that's part of why we ran a surplus. Could you please give us this money in the next budget cycle so that we can do what we were supposed to do, but because of supply problems, we couldn't. And we try to do that to encourage good budget management. Now, what happens is, and this is with our new accounting firm from 2 years ago, their rules are, if you plan on using the rainy day fund to fill the gap in your budget, then it's not unassigned, unallocated anymore. They shift it. I forget where it is, whether it's assigned or allocated, but it's coming out of the rainy day fund. They say you plan to use it. So what they do is they say, as of June 30, you finished your budget. You're planning to draw down $4 million. We're going to take that out of your rainy day fund. And that's why I took the rainy day fund from 72.4 to 68. Okay. And again, our recommended budget, we don't expect, I don't know what's going to be in 23. I would hope we don't use the rainy day fund again. So I look at the 68.4 as our balance. Each year, our expenses go up. So the ratio of 68 to 397 drops us down to 17.2%. And in 23, 68 million over 412 is 16.6%. As a CFO, you'll find it very hard for me to say that we have too much rainy day fund. As the mayor alluded to, that's what it's for. If you lose a major employer, God forbid, Hurricane Sandy, we had COVID. You need flexibility. You want to have resources. We were able to maintain our payroll. No layoffs, no furloughs. We didn't miss a beat. We collected all our taxes. Part of that is the conservative fiscal management of the Rilling administration, which includes the council and the Board of Estimate and Taxation. So we're trying to do the same thing. We have a policy in the city that our rainy day fund compared to expenditures should be between 7.5% and 15%. I don't like having a ceiling. I will tell you, in the Northeast, 15 to 20% is considered sterling or golden. In talks with the rating agencies, they say in the rest of the country, the Midwest, the South, the Far West, they see rainy day funds in 50 to 75% range. I think California has had a tremendous rainy day fund. They've had some very good years of surplus. It gives you a cushion. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'll take it, the 16.6%, but I guard it jealously. So we budget for a balance of revenues and expenditures so that the fund balance will not change. And that's what I'm looking at 22, 23. We are planning a $4 million drawdown in fiscal 23. So consequently, our auditors will take that down a little bit. This is a very important factor in bond ratings. You may have heard that when I issued my capital budget, I issued warnings. I think we are facing a challenge in that if nothing changes on the capital budget side and the capital projects, we will have to borrow so much money that I really worry about our credit rating. I would prefer to see some of the projects reversed, not done at this time, not approved, or slimmed down, or stretched out over time. My preference would be, here's how much we have in a budget. Here's how much we can afford in debt service. That debt service can handle so much of principal bonds. When I was borrowing at 1.75% or 2%, that debt service was the result of a lot of borrowings. As we start moving into 2.5%, 2 3/4, 3%, 4% interest rates, that same debt service will only allow us to borrow less because of that higher interest rate. I would rather work backwards and say, how much can we afford? Take the list of projects and prioritize. Start with your limit. It's what we do in our household budgets. I have a job. It's not enough money for everything I want. My spouse gets a job. We still don't have enough for everything we want. And we say, what can we afford? Until we get better, more revenue, we can only afford so much current expense and debt service for borrowings. I think the city should try to do that. So the two good factors going into this summer's borrowing meetings with the rating agencies, one will be the absolute superlative pension and OPEB results. The funding levels on that puts us probably in the top 10% of the whole country. They will be impressed. The other thing is, by maintaining our rainy day fund, think about it. The rating agencies are making an analysis and determination. What is the risk that if people buy these bonds, the city may not pay the interest and principal on time, or may not pay it at all? And when you have a rainy day fund of 72 million, it gives them a great deal of comfort. Okay, so those two things are very, very positive, and we try to keep them intact, as the mayor said. How the tax levy translates into mill rates by district. Most of you have done this longer than I have, but let me try to work through the numbers. We have the current year approved and the upcoming year recommended total local expenditures. Excuse me. 208 to 216, 189 to 196. We're looking at expenditures that we have to fund of $412 million. There's a little bit more that we have to fund when we give elderly exemptions or when we have a reserve against doubtful accounts where we don't think we're going to collect the tax money. That adds to the amount of funding we need to get. So that 412 million, I just happen to have that handy. That 412 million goes up to 421 million. Okay, we have to find enough money to fund the expenditures and also the fact that certain people aren't paying us taxes. We then have revenues, okay? We have other tax revenue, which might be the supplemental auto and back taxes. We have non-tax revenue. We have the grants that we get from federal and state governments. That adds up to $45 million. And we're also going to add the $4 million rainy day fund transfer. By taking down the money from the rainy day fund, we don't have to raise as much taxes to fund this 412 million net. That number, the result of those pluses and minuses, is called the net tax levy. Okay, that net tax levy for this proposal is $365.7 million. So we say, how do we raise that $365 million. Well, we have 6 different districts, okay? The cost of fire department services are spread for the 1st through the 5th districts. The 6th district has their own fire service. It's not fair to tax them. So we carve out that amount of money, which happens to be 28, about $29 million, and we allocate it only to those 5 districts. We also have garbage service, and garbage is only offered to the 1st through 4th districts. The 5th and 6th have their own garbage collection. We also have lighting, which we only provide to the 4th and 5th districts. Again, take out the money from the total and allocate it only to the districts to which we are providing those services. We then divide that amount that we have to provide for each district, and we divide it by the grand list for that district. So the numbers last year, 23,968, 23,968, the same for 1st through 3rd, they get the same services. 4th, Seward, Maine, a little higher, 24,054. The no garbage in the 5th district, 23,621, 6th district, 22.166. That 22.166 includes a separate charge provided by the 6th district. They say, please collect this on behalf of us. That pays for the services we provide, and that's 1.254. This year, the numbers went up a little bit, 24,730 out to 23,673. You can see the number of mills that changed, and you can see the percentage. The number of mills increase over last year's mill rate. 3.2, 3.4, 5th and 6th go up to 4.9 and 6.8. Okay, that's a mill rate. How do we calculate the average tax bill? We go with the median home value in each district. These numbers haven't changed since the reval. So the approved budget tax bill, we take the mill rate from last year, 23,968 times 240,000, you're paying a tax bill of 5756, and you go across the board like that. For this coming fiscal year 23, we take the yellow highlighted mill rate, 24,730, multiply it by the median home value, we get an average tax bill of 5939, and you go across the same way. The dollar increase, 188 out to 431, 1153, and the percent increase is the dollar increase of 183 over last year's average tax bill. Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, Henry, this is Troy. I don't know if you hear me. Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah, Henry, it's Troy. A
Yeah.
couple of things. Thank you. Great presentation. First of all, I appreciate your comments that you were in the paper and also tonight regarding our our credit ratings. I agree 100%. I've been on this Board of Estimate for 4 years now, and that's something that I've really felt that we needed to do here in Norwalk, because keep the our AAA rating. So I realize that our Common Council members will be setting the cap over the next 2 weeks, and I hope, and I know, I'm sure they will be taking into consideration your comments and going over the capital expense items and taking a look. Some things might, you said the things, some things might have to be delayed, reversed, or slowed down in order for us to be sure that we can stay within that guidelines. Because rates, obviously with inflation right now, I know it might be hopefully temporary, but rates are already heading in a direction that are not advantageous to us at this moment. The only thing I would like from you is if you could give us a copy of the credit rating, one of them, S&P or Moody's, one of them. I'd just like to take a look at what our report looks like.
Oh, sure.
And if you could just attach the key ratios and how they pertain and how our numbers lock in with those ratios over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that I have Bill Lindsay of Munistat Services, who's our financial advisor for raising money. and he did an analysis, a very fine one, in analyzing. I said, please run a model. I have these borrowings I think I have to have over the ones we're committed to. I've assumed, because there hasn't been a great willingness to modify the $220 million of capital projects that I have to fund that have already been approved, that hasn't been bonded for. So I just picked a number and I said, let's assume I have to do that over 7 years. Okay, some projects right away, some projects later. That's 30 million a year. And I said, please run a model with the 31 million a year, add the annual capital projects. And looking at the longer term, it's increased. We keep investing more, costs are higher, and we ran that at 35 million a year. So we're going to have that. We're going to have to do the 31, and maybe in an individual year, we might get away with less than 31, but I'll tell you, my recommended for this year is 39. And I don't know, when it leaves me and it goes to planning and zoning and other people, people seem to add capital projects that we've taken out. So 31 plus 35, that's 66 per year. Then I used an analysis that Tom Hamilton did with the Board of Ed, which showed over the next 25 years what their building management program is intended to be. And again, all these numbers are net of expected reimbursement from the state. When I say 220, that's assuming we get full reimbursement from the state. There's also a hidden cost because of the timing of cash flow. We lay out money, they give it to us 2-3 months later, but they only give us 89% because they have retainage, very common in construction. And the audit, the final audit, if it takes 2-3 years to build the school, and then it takes them 2-3 years to get an audit. So 5-6 years after we laid out the money, we might get the 11%, but we might get less because they say certain things don't qualify. That's a financing cost of working capital that I really, right now we have cash. One of two things has to happen. Either we borrow for it, or there's an opportunity cost because we take our cash and we're losing the investment earnings that we might earn on it. So those are, we start with the 66. Their 25-year projection is $450 million net of reimbursements. There are a couple of factors to remember. Number one, I've been told by our building management team, Alan Lowe and Jim Giuliano, that when a project gets delayed, the increase in expenses about 4%. Maybe it's 3.5%, but usually you can count on 4% increase. And that was historical before we got to this inflation. I said, Jim, I wasn't in Connecticut, but in New York, we had something called the Great Recession, 2008, and the economy really crashed, 2009, 10, 11, 12. And when that happens, usually there's less business. And so the suppliers cut their costs to be the ones who get the projects. I said, are you telling me costs didn't go down? He said, nope, 4% a year. So that's just an interesting phenomenon. And I heard recently, given the inflation, they're now looking at 7% a year. So when you look at the 25-year budget projection, and I attached some calculations I made in that capital budget package, it's an incredible amount. It's almost an unrealistic number. It's over $1 billion gross, and net nominal dollars over 25 years is about 850 million. But none of those have been approved yet. So
Right.
So we have the 220 and our annual expenses that are already have to be funded unless people change.
Well, I personally would like to see this model you're talking about with your assumptions, so that we could at least walk through with you. Because in my banking world, obviously, we did best case, worst case, break even for all deals we did, and it's helpful just to see so we can think along with you. And the other thing is, just one other thing, the money that we received on the ARPA funds last year, which avoided the tax increase, that $7 million is remaining. Is that
No,
factored in yet
no,
or
no.
not? Oh, sorry.
Not 7 million remaining. The government gave out ARPA money
For 2
in
years.
two parts.
Right.
So April, May, June of last year, and we're expecting the second part now.
Right.
We haven't spent anything yet. We're still lining up projects. We're allowed to spend it over the coming 4 years.
So there's a possibility that could be used maybe for, like we used it last year for tax remit or
Our
decrease it.
plan, this fiscal year 23, remember the Board of Ed used the term cliff?
Right.
And their concept is, if you have one-time funding, but expenses keep going up every year. So let's say expenses go up 5% a year. So in year one, you use that one-time funding like we did last year. The Board of Ed's concept is, well, next year you're going to have to give us 10%. You have to, because it only goes up. So what we did is that we said we wanted to try to offset the increase this current year, fiscal year 22. And that was about 13 million. And we assumed, let's assume that's the amount of increase again. Obviously, it isn't. But we said, we're not going to use ARPA to totally offset it. Let's use it to offset half. Okay, to ease on in to coming off of the heroin fix of one-time money. Okay, so we planned on using 7. So that's 13 and 7, that's 20 out of our 39 million. But there are things going on in our budget where we've had favorable variances. Okay, according to the accountants in the back of their consolidated annual financial report, they show budget versus actual. Okay, and in the year ended 21, revenues were 8.8 million favorable. More revenues came in than budgeted. Expenses were 10.9 favorable. Okay, you say, where's the money coming from? We collected 2.7 million in taxes more than we planned, and that was probably related to the tax sale. We had the town clerk raised 4.5 million more than expected because of all the building activity. So we have some positives there. On the negatives, on the expenses, but also favorable, grants were $1 million less than what we planned. Community services, 1.6 million favorable. DPW, 2.3 million favorable. And of course, giveth and taketh away, 4 million of the expense favorable was the Board of Ed. So it was part of the numbers, but it goes back and rolls into them. So it doesn't even hit our fund balance. So the point is, if we have these positives and surpluses, and we're managing in a way to have revenues greater than budgeted, expenses lower than budgeted, then maybe we will not need to use all of the ARPA designated money to offset taxes, and we can use it for other projects. And that's something out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. Great. Thank you. That's great.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
Henry, it's Ed Abrams. Could you restate for me the earlier comments on the efficiency study? When might we start to see some of the preliminary recommendations? When might they be made public? Are they going to be done in such a time frame that we'll be able to consider them as part of the 2023 budget, or is the reality that all of that will need to be 2024 and beyond?
No, great question. And that's why I was so excited. They started late. You know, we had negotiations, we had COVID, and they only started this fall. And I said to them, the Board of Estimate Taxation, the council would really love to see these results before they set next year's budgets. And I said, okay, we set the budgets in May. It would be great if we could see it a couple of months before. So they started with a target of March 15th. And I really thought they weren't going to be able to do it for a whole bunch of reasons. But they've come back to me and said, in this month of February, they have draft findings. And as good consultants, they want to sit down with the client and say, here's what we found, here's the conclusion we've drawn. You want to make sure your facts are accurate. You want to give the client an opportunity to make sure that the consultants are not doing something erroneous. So they've set up meetings in February to review department by department or at a very high level with the mayor and chief of staff and with the superintendent and her CFO. And maybe the departments come in and out and they review the findings. And what often happens is the report has to be modified. There were things that weren't complete. There were things that were erroneous. And they said, give us about a month. We think mid to late March, we will be able to issue a final report. It shows our methodology, it shows our findings, it shows our conclusions and our recommendations. And what I'm excited about is that it allows your good selves and the council to incorporate all that information into how you make decisions on the budgets.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I
Any
just
other-
wasn't sure with the preliminary cap and the final cap if it would fit the deadline. So thank you.
It might not. We're doing the best we can. We're
Yep.
doing the best we can. Any other questions? Okay, let me skip back. I think when I last,
I have a quick question, Henry, if you don't mind.
sure.
It's Artie. Great job, by the way. Really very detailed. I appreciate it. In the
Thank you.
beginning, you said that this is kind of and I'm paraphrasing, a draft budget. Do you foresee any changes to it? It's very good.
This operating budget?
Yeah.
Well, you have to remember, I feel like I'm important, but just to a limited extent. I start the process.
Yeah.
And it's not just me. On the operating, I started on the capital side, but the mayor and I jointly issue this recommended operating. And then you guys get involved. You know, on the operating, council sets the cap, you get the hearings, you can reallocate, you can request the council to increase the cap, and they can do so or not. And then it comes back to you to set the tax. On the capital side, I think it's just the opposite. You guys set the cap on the capital budget, and the council might be able to shuffle things. But the difference in my mind is that with capital, I come out with one recommendation, then planning comes out with a recommendation, and then other people have a shot at it. Then the mayor comes out with a recommendation. So I feel like I'm real important, but only for the first 3 innings. And I just lay it out. My goal is to try to give everyone the most valuable, relevant information to allow you to make the best decisions you can. And of course, if you need different information or more information, Tom and I are here to get that to you. So that's what my goal is. I'm glad you think the presentation was informative, and we can go from there. But when I say a draft, I don't mean that I have some numbers in my hip pocket that I'm holding back. I just meant from a process point.
Okay.
I'm about done. This is it for me.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Thanks.
And just
You're
quickly to help answer that, Mr. Kasimis,
Yes, sir.
I last year, if you recall, I asked the department heads to
Yes.
take another look at their budget and come in at one half of 1% lower
Yeah.
to see where they can still cut some. And I plan on doing the same thing this time around. And I will give them so much credit because last time, some of them found not only the 0.5%, the half of 1%, they found more. And I was really, really pleased with the way they took another look at their budget and came in with lower numbers. And I think we'll probably find the same thing this time around.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
I have a question, Henry. About 3-4 years ago, before you got here, there was a presentation. We were presented with the capital sort of like a 5-year plan of the capital budget or for school construction, I think specifically.
Right.
And we anticipated, or there was a graph that basically anticipated that the debt service was going to reach a point where the percentage of the debt service to our budget was going to reach a critical point where we might, we were sort of hitting up against the upper limit of that for purposes of the rating agencies.
Right.
But then that was projected to come down slowly at first, but pretty consistently over the ensuing years. But it sounds from your more recent analysis that we are that's changed somehow. That we're not, that we're in jeopardy of exceeding that percentage.
Yes.
That becomes problematic. Is there a way that you can, or what has happened in the interim that has caused that sort of shift in, we're going to have a problem, but it's not going to be a big problem. It's going to be a sort of a short-term problem.
Well,
To now it's going to be sort of a big, there's a big potential unless we scale back these projects to have a catastrophic problem.
right. The number you're talking about is 10%.
Yeah.
Based on our analysis, Bill Lindsay and I, AAA credits in Connecticut have a ratio of debt service to total expenses of 10% or less. And I will tell you, the way I calculate it, we're at 9.5% already.
Right.
Some of the rating agencies use what's called the government-wide financial statements, which include the general fund and the other funds, and it's done on a full accrual accounting basis. Most people look at financials for governments with the general fund. And at the general fund level, we're already at 9.5%. What's a little counterintuitive, and I'm not sure I want to announce publicly, is if you think about it, the more we spend, and the lower the ratio goes if the debt stays constant. The problem is, it's not the expenses, it's the debt. We used to borrow about $15 million a year every summer. And I think the year that I walked in 2 months before the borrowing, it was 25 million, which was considered a very large borrowing. And that was, I think, after a couple of years of the school building program. What's happened is the school building program has expanded. We also have all these capital expenses that were approved, but no one borrowed. And so it's like an albatross around our neck. My biggest fear is that some operations manager said, look, I got this capital project approved. I did an RFP. I have my vendor, my contractor. I gave them work with a purchase order. Here's the bill, pay it. And I say, I didn't borrow. We can't borrow that much. So what we do now, and as I've mentioned in the past, there are IRS rules. People say 1.75, 2%. Why don't you borrow the 300 million now at that low interest rate? The IRS rules for tax-exempt borrowing are very clear. They're trying to subsidize governments to do government work. So the classic is interest rates on treasury bills are 5%. And people are paying 40% tax rate. So after tax, they earn 5%, they pay 2% to the government. They're earning a 3% after tax yield on their investment. What the federal government says, look, why don't you just issue these bonds at 3%? The investors who liked it at 5% when it was taxable will borrow from you at 3%. And we, the federal government, will give up the 2% that we normally get. Okay, that's a good deal. But they said, you mustn't borrow more than you need, and you mustn't hold on to the money without using it up for longer than you need. So my example is we're building a bridge. We need $100 million, and it takes 3 years to build. Well, some clever financial officer says, you know what? I'm going to borrow 200 million, and I'm going to keep it around and spend it down over 5 years. And the IRS says, if you do that, first of all, if you invest and get a better return than the rate at which you borrow, you have to calculate that amount and pay the government, the Treasury Department back. That's called arbitrage rebate. But additionally, if you violate those rules, they can declare your bonds taxable. Okay? You want to talk about, forget about what the credit rating does. If we get a reputation that we didn't follow the rules for making sure that our bonds are tax exempt, we're out of business. We're not going to be borrowing. They're going to charge us a fortune. So what Chitsame Lamb, the controller, and I do now is every quarter we go out with cash flow projections. And we ask everyone who has capital projects to please project quarter by quarter for the next 2 years. You have your list of projects. How much money are you going to spend? And how much money you expect to get back? Because reimbursements are very important to us. So the Board of Ed may say, okay, we'll spend the money in quarter 2. We expect a reimbursement in quarter 3. It's a 1 quarter lag. And using those cash flows, that's how I determine how much money I have to borrow. Okay, so it's getting complicated, but what we're trying to do is not run out of money and stop construction, right? Public Works and the buildings are getting constructed primarily in the summer. It's better for construction. But at the same time, I don't want to run into an IRS problem. Okay, now you talked about a peak. What has changed in 4 or 5 years? We're building more schools. The city side has a lot of projects that maybe the issue is they were passed, but nobody borrowed for them. So when you borrow that, the debt service expense goes up, the repayment of principal and interest. And so I see it escalating. I don't see it, it depends. If that 450 million for the schools gets passed, I don't see a peak for 15 years, if not 20. Right now, we are paying off 20 million in bonds every year. They're maturing. And by the way, in about 3 years, that'll drop to 15 million, right? They mature, we issue new bonds. But we're getting 15 to 20 million maturing, and we're issuing 30, 50, 60, 75. We're increasing the debt load, we're increasing the interest rate. It's, I don't need an advanced calculator to say we're going to run into a problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So this was the tax levy. And I wanted to go to conclusion. And I thought about it. I don't want to be Dr. Doom, always doom and gloom. I feel like this is my opportunity to give the financial state of the city. And the financial state of the city isn't too bad. It's pretty good. Like I said, we had the pension and the OPEB are funded at 90% and 103% respectively. We have a 72.4 million rainy day fund, and budget versus actual, we were 19.7 million favorable. Some of it we rolled over, but obviously the line managers are doing a fine job. So on the operating side, we're doing fine. We're trying to moderate the tax increases, but we're living within those tax increases. Here's the amount of money we raise. Here's what we spend it on. Maybe pension and OPEB contributions going forward might drop a little. Debt service goes up a little. We have salary raises every year. We have some increased expenses, but that's a trend, okay? My big problem is if we have all those capital expenditures, then that debt service line grows out of control. We have health insurance that keeps going up, and we're just part of the system like everyone else. So I would say we're looking pretty good today, sunny, but I see some dark clouds on the horizon. I really feel my responsibility to the city is early warning detection. I don't want to tell you a month from now we have this horrendous thing and we may lose our bond rating. We're looking 2 to 3 years down the road, and there's opportunity for the elected officials, the mayor, the council, and the mayor appointed officials on the Board of Estimate and Taxation to take actions. So I'm just pointing in the way. I give you the information. I don't think it's a disaster, but it depends on the decisions and actions that are taken in the next 3 years. But right now, especially after COVID, I would compare us again to the top 10% around the country on how we handled COVID. I just see the next set of storm clouds, and I just want to make sure everybody is aware of it, so it's on the agenda. So in conclusion, as the mayor says, our recommended budget is balanced, fair, shows fiscal restraint, and affordable for Norwalk single-family owners. Thank you for your time. Any other questions or comments? I'm still here.
Thank you, Henry. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate that. And obviously, this is sort of an ongoing conversation over the course of the next few months, the budget season.
Yes.
But I want to thank you for your presentation and for your good news and sobering news. So
Quite
thank you.
welcome. Always a pleasure to work with the excellent, financially astute BET members. And we're all in this together to try to make Norwalk as fiscally sound as possible while we enhance the quality of life and make it a wonderful place to work, to live, to visit.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank
Sounds
you.
like a commercial, Henry. We can put you right on channel 12, put you on channel 3.
You know, when I do the slideshow, Mr. Mayor, you know, I work with Sabrina Church, Business Development and Tourism. So it's infectious. And we're all in this together. And we each have our role. And we're just trying to do the right thing. But it's hard. I really don't envy these tough choices that have to be made. Every single capital project has a handful of passionate supporters who said, this is so important to the city. The problem is somebody has to say, we can't do it all and which one. So I'm glad I'm not involved in those discussions.
Thank you, Henry. It's 8:18. There are a couple of sort of informational items on the agenda, but I suspect that unless there are any questions, we have all those documents. If there are any questions by any of the members of the BET, ask away. But if not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn and continue this conversation as well as any discussions about the other operating reports at a later date at the next meeting. So there's a motion to continue or to adjourn this matter. I would entertain it unless other people have questions.
I move to adjourn.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ed.